Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just take a moment or two to wait for a few more to enter the webinar. All right, I think we shall start. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on port state control examinations brought to you by Bureau Veritas. We're excited to have you here as we dive into some important topics that will help you be prepared for port state control inspections. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for today's session. First, we will start with Emily LeBay, Head of Technical Performance for the Port State Control Department at Bureau Veritas. Next, we have Darren Roberts, Systems, Audits, and Training Manager at Bureau Veritas. And finally, we're thrilled to be joined by Lieutenant Chris McFarland from the United States Coast Guard, subject matter expert on the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. Today's webinar will be broken down into 5 sections. We will start with the organization and role of port state control, preventative actions, port state control sensitive items and deficiencies, United States Coast Guard's overview of their program, and finally, we will wrap up with a Q&A session. Throughout the webinar, you are encouraged to type your questions into the box located at the top right-hand of your corner. You will see that throughout the presentation. At the end, we will take some time to go over the questions that have been submitted. With that, I would like to hand the floor over to Emily.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So as Kristen said, I am Amélie Labbé, working for Bureau Veritas Marine and Offshore in head office. And I am in charge of the department Technical Performance and Port State Control. So I will start this webinar with the 2 first chapters. It is more about theoretical part of port state control, and then Darren will follow with practical items to prevent detention. As a reminder, the organization and the role of port states, and the second chapter will be to prevent detention. So the port state, as you may know, are organized in a region. Most of them, and some, as US Coast Guard, are not organized in region. They are organized also to select ships. I will detail also their inspection process. And the worst case scenario is when the ship are detained, and how we can assist you as a recognized organization. But to start with, it's always good to remind all the parties which are involved in port states control and shipping industry, basically. So Bureau Veritas is in the middle. We act as a classification society, and in that case, we have to be compliant with IAC's requirements, and we are audited by external companies such as BSI. And when we are checking the compliance with the IMO instrument, we are acting on behalf of flag administration as recognized organization. And when those flags are European flag, we are inspected by agencies such as EMSA. And as a safety net, the port state control are, as I said, such as US Coast Guard or some region such as Paris or Tokyo MOU. So the purpose of a port state control is to establish a safety net to catch substandard ships. They inspect foreign ships on national port, And the condition, they will check the condition and the manning of ships. They undertake based on the initiative of local port states, but they can also act based on the request of flag administration or any other stakeholders. So the inspection of port state is acting as a backup of flag administration, but the responsibility to check compliance is primarily on flag states. We, as recognized organization, we act on behalf of flag state administration. We carry out survey and we issue certificates. But the responsibility to maintain the ship in compliance with international requirements lie under ship manager, ship owners. The port state has full authority under their waters. So their authority are from boarding a ship, inspecting a ship. They can also take action, and one of them can be a detention. All those authorization are detailed in IMO instruments, such as the main convention, but can also be detailed on national rules. As I mentioned initially, they are US Coast Guard is a port state, but other port states are organized in a region, as I mentioned, such as Paris or Tokyo MOU. You have the exhaustive list on the screen of all the MOU. It depends on the sea or the ocean. So now, just a brief overview of how they select ship. So each MOU, they gather data, and the port state control officer, every day, they will select ships. This is based on their ship particulars and the history of detention in that region. So the risk profile is actually the main way of targeting ships, and it will also define the priority for inspection. And then so the priority, either it's priority 1 or 2. So the inspection, it starts from an initial inspection, which actually is the first, they will get the first impression from the port state control officer. They will do some documentation check and do a walk around on the deck. So it will be detailed on one slide. And then if there is any clear ground, they will go to a more detailed inspection. Clear ground are basically an evidence that the ship does not correspond to international requirements, or the master or the crew member are not familiar with the operational procedure. And I will detail later on. A more detailed inspection is an in-depth inspection related to some aspects such as the ship's construction, but also the working condition. So the initial inspection, as I have introduced initially, they will initially check the validity of the certificate. The port state control officer, he will get an impression of the maintenance of the ship through the overall condition of the ship. And if the certificate and the overall condition of the ship are correct and satisfactory, the port state control officer will confine the inspection to report any possible deficiencies. However, in case of any clear ground, the port state control officer will go to a wider scope, which is a detailed inspection. So clear ground are basically evidence that the ship is substantially not compliant with the international requirement, or that the crew members are not familiar with essential procedure. This is a list of examples of clear ground. Of course, it's not exhaustive. But it can be, and one of example is that the crew members are not able to communicate with each other. or there has been any complaint that the ship is considered as not substandard. So if there are any clear grounds, the Port State Control Officer will carry out a more detailed inspection. This inspection is thorough, so it will inspect the ship structure and the equipment, and it will also check the operational requirements. The more detailed inspection goes from a lot of areas, machinery spaces, but also load line item, life-saving appliances, fire safety, and also the last point, which seems to be minor, but it's not, equipment that are in excess of convention. Even though it is not required by the convention, it's in addition to the requirement. It has to be compliant with the rule, or it has to be removed. But if it is on board the ship, it is to be compliant. So for the operational, so after they have checked the structure and the equipment, they will also check the operational requirement. So it's based on day-to-day activities, all the operations that are daily carried out, but also linked to the drills. So the Port State Control Officer, he will request a drill to be carried out based on his professional judgment to make sure that and assess the compliance. And the worst case scenario is that after this more detailed inspection, there are detainable items. So the ship is being detained by the Port State Control Officer. And in that case, the Bureau Veritas, as a recognized organization, we recommend ship manager and ship owner to inform us without any delay. It is important that we are able to go on board the ship to carry out an occasional survey. And most of the time, it will ease the process for the Port State Control Officer to release the ship. And in some cases, the Port State Control Officer will require an additional audit to be carried out. And if we are delegated to do so, we have to go on board as well for this reason. And having said that, we consider that the cooperation between the surveyor and the crew member is very important, and it will smooth the process, as I said, to release the ship. And as you must know, all our performance, flag performance, aero performance, and also company performance as calculated by different MOUs, they are all linked to each other. So we should all prevent detention and make sure that our performance are getting better. And so, as I said, in order to prevent detention, some action can be put in place. And the basic obvious statement would be to run a safe and secure ship. And also what is very important is the collaboration with the Port State Control Officer. So be honest, be polite with Port State Control Officer. And also it is always good to remember that the inspection starts at the gangway. So we always advise the accommodation ladder and pilot ladder to be compliant with IMO requirements in addition to all the ship equipment. But it gives, because the inspection starts at this equipment, it would give a good impression to the Port State Control Officer. So to avoid problem, again, an obvious statement would be to have a ship loaded and operated in proper manner and maintained in compliance with IMO requirement. And also, same as the gangway, what is important is to have certificate up to date, valid, and be able to show to the Port State Control Officer all the documentation available for this ship. Also, this is a list of points that are the main item to avoid detention. I would focus on the cleanliness of the vessel, for example, which is an item that we see often on the detention report. Security, so the access on board the vessel, again, that's the first contact that the port state control officer will have with the crew member. It's important that the security is in compliance. And again, cooperate and be polite with port state control officer. And as I have already mentioned, the manning is very important. So the familiarity of the crew members, especially with how port state control inspection is carried out. It is important that they are familiar with this so that they will be able to collaborate and cooperate in an easier manner with port state control officer. And it would be good that these actions are included in the safety management system and effectively implemented. And in case of an accidental damage, before calling the port, it is very important to report this accidental damage to the main actors. Recognized organization, it is important that we are made aware. We will also report this to the flag administration. And prior to calling the port, it is important to report to the port state. This process can avoid detention because if the remedial actions are appropriate, the port state control officer will assess the case in a different manner than if it was not reported. And as a classification society, we propose also to provide training to the ship manager. It can be to the shore people, but also to the ship officers on lesson drawn from PSC inspection, but also ship operation. We also on our side implement a concentrated inspection campaign. So we follow the same item than the main MOU, such as Paris or Tokyo MOU, but we also perform our own campaign based on detainable item, the sensitive item. So it is also to assist you to prevent detention. And for the ship that we have targeted as not performing well, we have put in place a program that we call Concentrated Compliance Survey Program. For this program, we have amended our rule, Part A, to consider what we call unscheduled survey. And it will actually assist the ship owner to get a check on a sensitive item for these targeted ships. And we often carry out this survey within the 90 days after the annual survey because we know it's a critical period. But we also can carry out this survey at any time as decided by BV. On top of this program, in addition of this program, we have also signed a contract with an external company called Risk4C. They have their own platform based on input that they get, such as the age, the history of each ship. So they collect all those data, and from those data, the output is performance that they are able to assess. And also, they are able to create checklists, tailor-made checklists on the program, which is called POCRA, Port of Call Risk Assessment. So for a list of ships that we have identified, Risk4C send directly to email addresses for shore people, but also onboard ships of tailor-made checklists based on the risk assessment of a specific port for this specific ship. A notification by email is sent with a checklist. And they have their own matrix to assess the risk, and it is based on the severity of an inspection, but also on the probability of an inspection. And we have decided that from the risk level 5 up to 9, the ship will receive a notification with the checklist. So after having gone through all the detail of all the action that we have put in place, I will leave the floor to Darren. He will go into the practical item, the main item for detainable deficiency. So I leave the floor to you, Darren.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Darren Roberts from Bureau Veritas Fleet Management, Systems Audits and Training Department. And I'm going to go through with you today some of the common deficiencies that we tend to find when vessels are detained. So if we look at the statistics over the last 10 years, there are 10 main defect categories. And although these defect categories may move up and down this list of the top 10, the same 10 tend to be there year on year. And within those defect categories, we have 10 main items. And again, they may move around on the list, but they tend to be the same items year on year. So the problem is nothing's really changing. So let's have a look at what the common issues are. So because we've got our guest, the US Coast Guard, I've decided to focus on the top 5 defect categories for the US Coast Guard. The top one being fire safety, followed by ISM, life-saving appliances, propulsion auxiliary machinery, and ISPS and vessel security. So for each of these 5, I'm going to focus on the top 5 current defects categories. So under fire safety, we've got fire doors, extinguishing installations, dampers, ventilation, fire detection, and fire prevention. So for fire doors, you can pretty much guarantee on every single port state control inspection or class survey, there will be an issue at some point with a fire door. Ships vibrate, ships move, ships flex. So a fire door that was closing 15 minutes ago could now fail to close. It's an operational issue, and as long as we address those issues as we identify them, there'll be no issues with port state control. However, what we tend to find during surveys is we have deficiencies with fire doors that haven't just occurred. We have issues such as the fire doors not closing properly, latching arrangements don't work, the closing mechanisms are inoperative. We often find that the actual doors are corroded themselves. One of the all-time favourites with port state control deficiencies and class surveys is the doors are held back with some sort of cowboy closing or hold-back arrangement. And you can see there from the photograph on the left-hand side of the screen, not only is this an ingenious piece of machinery and equipment, it's quite substantial. It's a piece of reinforcing bar. It's approximately 15 millimeters in diameter. So in the event of a fire, even if the crew pulled at that door quite hard, that door is not going to close. On the lower photograph, you can see it's held back by wire. Again, in the event of a fire, this door is not going to automatically close and prevent the spread of fire. One of the further issues that we tend to find is that doors are modified. So a fire-resisting door is only able to resist a fire if it maintains its original structural properties. You can see from some of those photographs there that there's been modifications made to the door. There are now holes in the door where either things have been added, removed, or the closing arrangement has been changed. Once we have holes in that fire door, its resistance to fire, its integrity is compromised, and you cannot guarantee that it will maintain its fire-resisting properties that it started off when it was new. One of the other issues we also have is, you can see from the photograph on the left, is this compromise of safety against security. We have quite often we find that we have doors in fire-resistant divisions which can only be opened from one side. And in the event of an emergency situation, we cannot either exit that space or gain access to the space to provide assistance to the people inside. Our next category is fixed firefighting. Again, if we keep on top and we do the maintenance of our equipment and we pay attention to the issues and resolve them as and when they arrive, we should have no problems with port state control. But you can see from the photograph, and those of you who are definitely shippy people will recognize this as the water spray system from a paint store. The crew tick boxes on checklists to say that they test these installations once a week or once a month. Port state control come on board the ship and they ask to test the installation, and it's been so long that the system was actually tested, it's either full of rust, full of corrosion, or it's clogged up with scale and salt accumulations, rendering the installation completely useless. We also have fixed firefighting installations such as CO2 installations. And again, these are inspected by the crew periodically. They're inspected by a third-party certification authority once a year. But again, port state control inspections and class surveys, we frequently find issues with these. And you can see from the photographs, we've got hoses that are twisted. We've got hoses that are not actually connected. So in the event we activate the system, the CO2 is going nowhere other than into the CO2 room itself. Or you can see from the bottom left-hand picture there, we've got a local fixed firefighting installation, and there's actually no handles on the installation for operating the system. In the event that there's a fire in this space, we cannot physically activate the installation. One of the favourites of surveys, both from port state and a class perspective, is fire dampers. And again, once a week, the crew are testing these installations. They operate the lever clockwise, anti-clockwise. The lever moves. They hear the loud clank inside the damper that indicates to the crew that the damper is not only there, it's operational. But so infrequently do they actually open up and do a physical inspection of the damper itself. And you can see there from a couple of the photographs, the dampers themselves are so heavily corroded in the event that there is a fire on board the ship. These are not airtight, and they will allow the ingress of oxygen and air into the machinery space that will allow the fire to be continually fed. You can see from the top right-hand side there, there's been wear and tear on the installation, and when the fire flaps are actually closed, they are not providing an airtight seal. Fire detection systems are another favourite of port state control and certainly class surveyors. We go on board the ships, we do our inspections, and if you've ever seen a class surveyor walking on board a ship, you'll find that they tend to look up quite often. And this is because we're looking for suspect items such as cable trays, but quite specifically the fixed fire detection system. And we can see there one of the fire detector heads is not secured, and another one has been ingeniously removed and has been linked out from the installation. This particular firehead didn't show a fault on the system because it had been linked out, but this was the ship's laundry. And in the event that the ship had a fire in the laundry, we would not be able to detect a fire in that space and take measures to address it. Another common thing, we walk on board the bridge, we look at the fire detector panel, and one of the things we look for is inhibited fire zones and for fault indications on the system. And the first question that you'll be asked by the port state control officer will be, what is the fault indication, which zones are inhibited, and why are they inhibited? Looking at the photograph on the right, you can see one of the ways that the crew managed to get around inhibiting fire detection systems. So something has been going on board this ship that's caused the fire detector to activate unwanted. And they've taken the ingenious method of applying a rubber glove over the fire detector head. While at the time it might have seemed like a really good idea, it's been forgotten, the crew have not paid attention, they've walked away from it, and we now have a fire detector head that is inoperative. The fire detection system is there for the protection of the crew and detecting fire before it becomes unmanageable. Fire prevention is a key on board the ship. We have fire detection systems are there as a backup. Fire detection systems are there in the event that we do have a fire. But the main thing is we should be preventing it from happening in the first place. And we have issues during port state control detentions where the machinery spaces are incredibly dirty. Dirty bilges, oil accumulations, oil soaks lagging, blocked access routes, poor housekeeping. Blocked gauge glasses, we have a diesel tank and we can't be bothered every 4 hours during the watch to press the plunger and see what the level the fuel tank is at. So we create, and as a class surveyor, I've seen some ingenious contraptions applied to the quick closing cocks on the bottoms of gauge glasses, absolute pieces of engineering mastery. But again, you put these pieces of equipment on the ship, you fit it to the gauge, you have a fire in the engine room when the glass in the gauge shatters because the gauge cannot no longer self-close. You've got a continual supply of fuel to the fire. So the next category I'm going to look at is life-saving appliances. So very common deficiencies: lifeboats, launching arrangements, emergency lighting systems, lifebuoys and life rafts. So again, if we keep on top of the maintenance and we deal with the issues as and when they occur, we're not going to have problems with port state control. But you can see it's one of the top 5 deficiencies. So ship's crews are not actually dealing with the issues. Everybody accepts that lifeboats, we drop them over the side, they suffer from wear and tear. That's acceptable as long as we address the issues and deal with any deficiencies. And once again, ship's crews tick boxes. They complete checklists once a week, once a month, to say that they are completing the inspections of the equipment. But all too often, we go on board the ships following a port state control detention, and we identify issues that evidently have not occurred within the last week or certainly month. Issues such as the onload release installations, either incorrectly rigged or with deficiencies on it, corrosion to davits, and you can see from the photograph there on the right hand side of the screen, this is the centrifugal winch brake of a lifeboat davit, which is inspected externally once a year and is supposedly maintained on a regular basis by the ship's crew. But you can see from that photograph, there's no way that corrosion has happened overnight. So when this gets opened up, there's a problem with the davit. Port state control asks to see the lifeboat launched. The crew cannot launch the lifeboat. We open up the centrifugal brake and we have a look, and this is one of the evidences. It's a detainable deficiency. The life-saving appliances have not been maintained in accordance with the requirements. You can see there again some recovery installations. The pin on the right-hand side was a result of a survey. We had a vessel detained because the free fall lifeboat davit would not slew. When we actually went to look at what was going on, we ended up with 5-ton chain blocks on the davit to try and get it to move. And this davit had apparently been serviced within the last 8 months. Once again, crew are ticking boxes saying that inspections have been completed when they evidently have not been completed. And when they do complete the inspections, they're identifying deficiencies and not reporting them, so they cannot be dealt with by the management system. Emergency lighting. Everyone's been on board ships and everyone's seen a light that's gone out at some point over the last day. And we accept that ships vibrate, ships move, ships operate in quite adverse conditions, and the average bulb will not have a finite life. And while we can accept the fact that the bulb in the emergency escape may be inoperative and we can replace it, what we all too often find in port state control detentions is that the actual emergency lighting system itself is defective. And you can see from the photographs there, we have missing fixtures, missing fittings, loose wires, corroded fixtures and fittings. Not acceptable. These are pieces of equipment, but once again should be inspected periodically by the ship's crew to make sure that everything's functional and operational. The port state control officer comes on board, has a look at it, and it's evident that this deficiency did not occur overnight. Lifebuoys, again, it's something we tend to walk past quite regularly while we're on board the ship, and we often become blind to issues and deficiencies on lifebuoys. The reflective tape. Reflective tape should be renewed periodically. So when a light is shined on it, it does reflect back. They do perish. They do not last forever. We have issues you can see on the top right where the quick release mechanism for the bridge wing life buoy has been secured in place. So in the event that we need to release it in a hurry, we cannot release it. On the bottom right-hand side there, you can see a life buoy. If you look at the top, in the center of the reflective tape, there is a hole. So the life buoys have the buoyant material injected to them, and the hole it's injected in is then sealed. Occasionally in service, we do get damages to these, the sealing arrangements. The sealing arrangements go missing, but what can happen then is we can get water ingress into the life buoy, and life buoys have an operational weight at which they remain buoyant. If the life buoys become full of water or they have water ingress into them, This affects the weight of the life buoy, and when the life buoy is launched, it may not float the way it's been designed to float. For life rafts, again, something that ship's crew do inspections of, but all too often we have issues with the hydrostatic release units have not been correctly arranged, that the hydrostatic release unit is expired. We find quite often in a lot of inspections that the embarkation ladders are defective, and the embarkation ladder sits next to the life raft, usually nicely coiled and covered over in a lovely tarpaulin. And then when the crew come to do the inspection, they peel back a corner of the tarpaulin and basically make sure the embarkation ladder is still there. It's very, very rare that the crew actually physically remove the canopy, remove the cover of the embarkation ladder, deploy the ladder and do a complete visual inspection. Had they done a complete visual inspection, it would reveal issues such as seized shackles, such as defective or frayed ropes, such as defective or frayed whippings, cracked ladders, and any other issues on board embarkation ladders. But the first time anybody knows about it is when the port state control officer comes on board and asks for the canopy to be removed from the embarkation ladder. It's at this point that all of the deficiencies start to be exposed. One of the other common issues we have is for davit launch life rafts, that the davit is not arranged and ready for deployment. Quite often we find the crew are not familiar with the fact that it's a davit launched life raft. And this has become quite a common in detentions, certainly in the UK over a number of years, where we've asked the crew to demonstrate the operation of the davit for the life raft, and the crew were unaware of the fact that the life raft would require a davit to operate it. On the right hand side of there, you can see it's not a serious issue, but one of the common things that we have is we now have service exchanges on our life rafts. We don't maintain the life raft on board the ship. The expired life raft gets sent ashore for servicing, and we get a replacement unit sent on board. When the replacement unit is sent on board, the identification card should be modified and changed to reflect the name and the IMO number of the particular vessel it is now installed on. So propulsion and auxiliary machinery, so boilers, fuel oil leakages and exhaust systems, cleanliness of the machinery space, and emergency sources of power being the top 5 issues that we have at the moment. So boiler safety devices, if there's a pressure gauge fitted, the pressure gauge should be operational and the pressure gauge should be legible. Any leakages on the manholes, on the burner interface where the burner goes into the boiler should be tight, gas tight, and not exposing any internal gases. Boiler gauge glasses should be operational. It's all well and good that we may have a remote indication, but the main indication on a boiler is that local indication, and it should be operational, and the crew should be aware of how to blow down the gauge glass. Leakages, steam leakages, exhaust leakages, and fuel leakages on boiler installations should be addressed as soon as they occur. It's a very, very high temperature environment, and there's a high risk to the crew working in that area. Again, fuel leakages on the fuel pumps, make sure we keep the fuel pumps leak free. When we do have leakages, that we clean up the leakages, and that any high pressure fuel pipes are double screened or shielded. Exhaust systems, quite common ones for port state control inspectors, where there's missing lagging, the lagging is damaged, and hot surfaces are not protected from personnel are not protected from the hot surfaces. Machinery space cleanliness it's a very, very common one during port state control inspections, and certainly class interventions. Poor housekeeping. We should be having clean bilges free of oil, free of accumulations, free of oil rags, etc., and trying to maintain our bilges in a dry condition as possible. Any fuel leakages should be cleaned up as soon as possible. Garbage accumulations should be limited. When we do have garbage on board the ship, garbage should be kept in metallic, fire-resistant containers, not, as you can see in the photograph there on the right-hand side, in bin sacks at the top of the engine room, which number 1 is a fire hazard, and number 2 is actually impeding the exit of the engine room in the event of a fire. There's been a recent concentrated inspection campaign for emergency sources of power. Again, as class surveyors, we dealt with this quite a lot, but some of the issues we have is the level in the fuel tank isn't where it should be. We should know exactly how much fuel needs to be in the tank, but once a week, once a month, we run the engine, we consume the fuel, and then the crew forget to top up the fuel tank to the level it should be maintained at. We come quite often when we come to do a blackout test, the engine fails to start. It may start, but fail to go on the board. Both of these are port state control deficiencies. And one of the other ones that we have is, okay, we've tested the generator has started, it's gone online, everything's really good and how it should be. We stop the generator and then we go to test the secondary means of starting, and quite often we found that the secondary means of starting has failed. I have been on board surveys where the secondary means of starting was actually missing from the ship. So ISPS and vessel security, access control, drills, awareness, documentation, security equipment. And of all of the port state control inspection regimes, the US Coast Guard hold ISPS and vessel security very, very highly. Unlike some of the other MOUs who tend to skim over it, the US Coast Guard pay a lot of attention and a lot of focus to ISPS and vessel security. And as Amelie mentioned earlier on, its initial impressions that paint the picture of a vessel and how an inspection is going to proceed. So a poor gangway watch or no gangway watch on board the vessel is instantly a red flag to any inspector coming on board the ship. The gangway should be monitored, access should be controlled, and any visitors boarding the vessel should be escorted to the place where they need to be. In the event that a port state control or even a class surveyor or ISPS auditor boards a ship and there is no access control to the vessel, it's an instant red flag that tells the inspector, the surveyor or the auditor that something on board the ship is not right. Quite often we look at the security drills. We find that the drills are not being conducted at the required intervals. We find that we've had a crew change of more than 25%, and the mandatory crew change has not been carried out. We find that we conduct, the vessels are maintaining records of ISPS drills, but in actual fact, not all of the crew are participating. We find that there's records have been falsified. There's a record of a drill being conducted, but in actual fact, the vessel was important. Half the crew were ashore at the time. And quite often we have people board the ship and they prioritize that initial safety familiarization on board in the vessel. And there's a lack of adherence to that security familiarization. Are the crew familiar with security arrangements and the ship's security plan on board the ship? Another common issue we have is that security awareness. So the crew are not conducting that basic security awareness training on board, so they are now unfamiliar with the duties. We ask the crew, what are your duties with regards to security? And they quite often turn around and they have no idea whatsoever what their duties are when it comes to security. They've got no awareness of the requirements. They've got no idea what security equipment is fitted to the ship. One of the quite common ones is we ask them who the company security officer is, and they have absolutely no knowledge of who the company security officer is. We then run an ISPS related drill. We ask them to do a basic bomb search, and they walk around the ship and nobody actually has any idea what they're doing. And the drill is quite shambolic. Another common issue, obviously, the ship security plan has to be inspected, has to be reviewed and approved either by the flag administration or by an RO on behalf of the flag administration. When the security plan is approved, it gets given a letter, and that letter is evidence to any inspector that the security plan has been approved. The absence of this letter does not give the inspector the assurance that the ship's security plan has been approved. So it's quite an important one. We cannot, on board the ship, show the contents of the ship's security plan to anybody. So the letter is the evidence that we can give to port state control inspectors that the security plan has been reviewed and it has been approved. Certificates of proficiency, we quite often find that the people on board have designated security duties and they've not got the right levels of proficiency. We've had ships where the ship security officer is designated as the second officer and the second officer has not done ship security training. Issues such as the ship security documents not in a restricted area. We've been into ships where the ship security records are just in the ship's office. It's not considered a secure area. They're on a bookshelf, anyone can access the security records. Records of last 10 ports, it's a requirement. Quite often we find that the ship's crew are not maintaining these records of last 10 ports. Another one is the continuous synopsis record. We've had changes to the management, changes to various, the owners of the ship, and the continuous synopsis record has not been updated. We actually quite often encounter vessels where the latest continuous synopsis record or the amendment record is missing from the ship. Security equipment, we've sometimes found that the equipment's inoperative, the crew are not aware what equipment is fitted. There's no records of maintenance of security equipment, and there's no record of the ship's security alert being tested. So all of this builds, if you remember rightly, I think ISM was number 2 on the original list. So why have I left ISM until the end? Well, the reality of it is everything is ISM. The maintenance of the ship is ISM. Risk assessment, safe working environment is ISM. Implementation of company policy is ISM. The master's responsibility and authority to ensure that the ship is operated safely and securely, it is ISM. The designated person, ISM, the designated person should be ensuring that everybody on board the ship is working in a safe environment and that any resources required by the ship are provided by the company. Everyone has an adequate understanding of the rules and regulations, whether it's SOLAS, whether it's MARPOL, or whether it's the ISPS code. We've got to make sure that our crew can respond to shipboard emergencies, whether that's a security emergency or a safety emergency. Procedures for maintenance. That when we do the maintenance, if we identify any deficiencies, that the deficiencies are reported on and acted upon. In the event that a vessel gets a port state control inspection and we have a defective piece of equipment, if the crew have reported it to the company and the mechanisms are in place for the replacement, the spare parts, the servicing to be done, that's ISM working. If we've reported it to the port state before we enter the port, that's ISM working. If class have been informed and there's a condition of class or there's a dispensation letter from the flag, that's ISM working. And if all of those mechanisms have been completed and the evidence is in place, it's not a port state control deficiency because ISM is working. Deficiencies should be reported, should be acted on in a timely manner by the company. And for me, as an auditor, the most important thing is the internal audit. Internal audits are the opportunity that you have as a ship manager to have a look at the ship and make sure that everything is all right before the external people come on board. The internal audit should be much more stringent, much more strict than the external audit. You should be finding significantly more non-conformities and findings during an internal audit than we do during class surveys, ISM audits and port state control inspections. If the internal audit process is robust and thorough, you will identify all of these issues before the external parties can identify them, and they put the mechanisms in place to address them so that when the external parties come on board and do their inspections, we've addressed any issues that may have been identified. And for me, that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to hand over to Lieutenant Chris now for his part from the US Coast Guard.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. Can everybody see me and hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Right.
Now we can.
Okay. Yeah, my connection here has been a little finicky the last couple minutes. Okay, Darren, thank you, and thank you everybody to the BV staff for having me today, and thank you everybody, ship owners and industry representatives, for taking time to join us on this webinar. Lieutenant Chris McFarland, I work for the Office of Commercial Vessel Compliance at Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. Specifically, I'm working with the VITA Act that's coming online. However, I do work for the Office of Port State Control. So I have pretty good visibility of all the detentions that take place in the country, and my office has the responsibility of oversight and reviewing all those detentions that happen throughout the entire United States for our Port State Control program. All right, so starting off on ship detentions, essentially 2025 and 2024, all of the statistics every year get published, so they are available to you. But what I would say, we rank and target our Port State Control exams based on that data. And I saw a question earlier in the chat. While we don't share and publish the scoring or risk data for particular ships, we do post the detention information at the end of the year, and that is available to the public. Higher detention ratio, the more detentions you receive, it does equal more points. It does equate to more Port State Control exams and broader scope that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. While we don't associate every detention, we do examine each detention to determine if a class society is responsible for that ship becoming substandard. I'd like to touch on appeals. So unlike the rest of, I think there's many countries in the international community with their port state programs that are not necessarily as pro appeal. We encourage, if you have a entity that is associated with a detention, or if you're an affected party, we do encourage you to appeal. If you know, maybe the Coast Guard has missed something. Maybe the ship was taking proactive measures to fix this issue, and the documentation wasn't understood. There could be many of issues, but we encourage any affected party to appeal. There is no repercussion to appeal, and so historically, we would get most of our appeals from ship management, charterers, or ROs that don't want to be associated with those detentions. The appeal process, it does start with the local Coast Guard unit that imposed that detention. The next level of appeal would be to the Coast Guard district office that is above and supervisory to that local unit. And then finally, the headquarters directorate, which I work for, Office of Commercial Vessel Compliance, we would be the Coast Guard headquarters appeal authority. And we do review those and look at all the facts, all the evidence that's presented with the appeal. So the regulatory site that discusses the appeal process is 46 CFR 1.03. And again, what I touched on, there are the three different levels. It does start with the unit, but those are three different entities that you are able to appeal through should you not get the answer that you want. At the lower level, it just continues to rise. So some appeal statistics, 17 total for 2025. Looks like we had, and these numbers may change a little bit, and we do publish some of this, 8 challenging the actual merit of the detention itself, meaning the party affected didn't feel that it was a detainable deficiency, and then 9 contesting the party that's associated with it. This is a frequent topic of discussion. If your class society is on board during a port state control exam, as Darren mentioned earlier, we all have different roles in the port state control. You know, they call it the safety net, or some folks will call it like a Swiss cheese model, different levels of safety. The Coast Guard's mission is to eliminate substandard ships from U.S. waters, and we're the last net in that safety process. So while everybody does have the role, your class society has their role, the ship's crew has their role, the flag state of the ship in which it's registered under has their role, and then if it is in U.S. waters, that's where the U.S. Coast Guard has its role. We do try to let the ROs and the flag states carry out their surveys should they be on board at the same time. But I do just want to make a point that for example, like a flag state detention, if you're in U.S. waters and let's say your registry has your flag surveyor on board and they were to impose a flag state detention, the Coast Guard doesn't necessarily recognize that as fulfilling that IMO detention piece. There's definitely times we'll honor that and allow the flag or the RO process to carry out. But just because the ship is detained under the flag doesn't necessarily protect it from an IMO detention with the Coast Guard's port state control program. It's a misconception that we do get questions about quite often. And just touched on this a little bit. Let's see. The last thing that I didn't quite touch on was we can make a risk-based decision. So if we're on board and there is an RO, you're doing a class survey, and or you are maybe class is on board and you have a flag surveyor on board, we want to allow that process to take place. So many a times if we schedule an exam and we show up and there's a survey that's in process, we'll make a risk-based decision and determine whether or not we want to hold off on that port state control exam and let your survey pan out and revisit the ship. And then sometimes we will try to do our examination while separate from the other one. Detention Review Board. Not sure if everybody is aware of this process. We review every single detention that is imposed in the United States at the headquarters level. So last year there was over 80 detentions imposed on foreign vessels, and my office reviews every single one of them. This review process is composed of a panel, and just to clarify, this is regardless of appeal or not. We review every single one and we verify the validity of that detention. We recognize that people do make mistakes, and obviously even the United States Coast Guard doesn't always get it right. So our role at the headquarters level is to review all of those detentions, ensure that they are in alignment with the procedures for port state control, the expectations for the IMO, and that they are in line with our internal policies and procedures. And this also serves as a way for us to improve our processes and ensure that our port state control exam teams are applying their practices consistently throughout the United States. With the Detention Review Board, we do invalidate detentions. That is not, I wouldn't say it's, I don't have a percentage or a statistic. However, it does happen. And I would just say that there's many of times where we have looked at a detention and we might not invalidate the entirety of the detention. So your vessel may have been issued a code 30 for, let's say, the most egregious, and then the umbrella deficiency is your ISM code 30, which is a detention. That may very well stay, but we may invalidate one of the detainable deficiencies. So just throughout our review, we don't necessarily invalidate the entirety if we find issues, but we even address individual deficiencies within that 835, your Port State Control Form A, Form B. So we do invalidate. There are many times where we have made mistakes and we correct those. Okay, and this is our point of contact list. We're available, and Port State Control at USCG.mil is likely the best place for the headquarters directorate to be reached. And with that, we will shift to a Q&A. And I know I was brief, but I'm happy to answer questions the best I can. And I hope everybody got some value out of this.
Great. Thank you so much. I'd like to take this time to thank all of our presenters for your insightful contributions today. As Chris mentioned, we'll move forward onto a Q&A section. We're going to give our presenters the floor to continue answering questions that have been submitted. Take this time to continue adding questions in the chat. Please also take note that on the right-hand side next to the chat, there is a tab that says handouts, and that is where you can find the PowerPoint. So with that, let's start getting to some questions. So I think we have a first question for Emily, number 45. It says, thanks, Emily. Can BV do this check on non-BV classed vessels?
Thank you, Kristen. Yes, I would have a basic answer to this question. I would advise you to class all your ship under BV class, and then you will get the service, I would say. But generally speaking, yes, we focus our service on our BV class ships. I am talking about the CCSP program, the CIC, and also the checklist from Risk Force. This is most of our cases are under BV ships. So yes, that would be my advice and my answer to this question.
Great, thank you. We have another question, line 66, that says, why is it that only 4 MOUs are following the new inspection regime?
Again, I will have my answer on this question would be that unfortunately each memorandum of understanding has their own policy, and even if they apply a new inspection regime, each regime is actually different, so unfortunately, you have to go and check on their website what is the inspection for each the regime for each MOU. So they are completely working independently each other.
Great, thanks for that. We have another question on line 61 regarding embarkation ladders. The question is, from which period counted 30-month from date of manufacture, which placed on embarkation ladder or date of installation? It says, please clarify regarding embarkation ladders. As per the new IMO standard, embarkation ladder has requirement strength testing with key interval 30 months. Means safety embarkation ladders to be tested and appropriate certificate issued. If test does not carry out, embarkation ladder will not be in use. If embarkation ladder is on board more than 30-month period, that point for deficiency, from which period counted 30-month from date of manufacture, which placed on embarkation ladder, or date of installation? Do we need some clarity on that, or can we answer that one?
I'm just double checking now. It's not in force yet, and it's not embarkation ladders, it's pilot ladders that it's applicable to. I've been working with the Australian pilots authorities, and the Australian pilot authorities were the people who worked with the IMO to get this new regulation put into force. I can't remember when it comes into force off the top of my head, but give me a few minutes and I'll find out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Darren. We have another one here on line 4 regarding garbage storage. So it says, often after a long voyage, the garbage storage capacity is fully occupied, and crew is forced to move part of the waste elsewhere so that storage is not overflowing, giving increased risk for pollution. The alternative storage is most of the time not compliant for purpose, yet it is the only feasible option. Any practical advice what crew or manager can do to avoid deficiency by PSC, as in reality, PSCO will likely report it even if disposal is arranged or communicated in the present port?
That's quite a tricky one to answer in reality, but the fact is, if this is a regular occurrence, the garbage storage facilities on board are not fit for purpose. So if the vessel is arriving pretty much in every single port with a surplus of garbage, they need to reassess the garbage management plan and the garbage storage facilities, because the vessel should have adequate garbage storage facilities for the allocated or the assigned voyage that the vessel is about to participate in. So it's a systemic issue. They need to look at the issue. If it's a recurrent issue, they should be looking at, do they frequently have issues with the amount of storage space that they have for garbage? And if it's inadequate on a regular basis, they need to reassess garbage storage and possibly looking at putting additional facilities on board the ship for the storage of garbage.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have a few more questions in line. Line 79, flag state detention is an acknowledgement that the vessel is not in compliance with rules and regulations. While you mentioned the Swiss cheese model, could you elaborate why PSC would not accept the FSD as a prima facie of non-compliance? After the owner manager, the flag and RO are the next who are on the ball.
Good morning. Yes, I can elaborate on that. So while we won't necessarily, it's a case-by-case basis, and I would say that the Coast Guard is going to evaluate the totality of the circumstances. What is the detainable deficiencies? What things did we find on our own? Now, what we won't do, we will not detain for example, if your vessel is getting a flag state examination and your flag surveyor detains that vessel for a specific thing, the Coast Guard's not going to take that deficiency, or they shouldn't, and detain it for the same thing. So if, let's just say, fire doors, I'll just give an example. The ship has removed fire doors, or all of the fire doors are held back with holdback hooks. They've also, as one of the pictures in the presentation showed, have covered it up with a rubber glove so it can't detect fire, and maybe there's even a fault on their panel. The flag surveyor notates all that. Well, the Coast Guard comes on, and while we might not initially detain for under port state control for those specific items, if I was an examiner, what I can tell you is there's likely a systemic failure in the safety management system in that case. We would look at all the circumstances. We would ask questions. While we wouldn't duplicate the deficiencies issued by the flag, if there's a systemic issue and a breakdown in the safety culture and the safety management system is not being adhered to, I would take that as it shouldn't have got to this point, and it's in U.S. waters. So we would still be within our right to impose a port state control detention. However, I'll just end it with, it doesn't always happen that way, and it is case by case. You may have the port state control, as I mentioned earlier, defer to the flag and the RO to carry out their surveys. And, we say, thank you. Looks like you guys are being proactive. You found issues with the ship and you're taking care of it at your level. I hope that answered the question a little better.
Great, thanks for that. We have another question on line 80. The PSC activities are extremely complex, as you've seen from the excellent presentation. Some of audits and inspections already have been performed by distance according certain situations as ISM code audits. Do you think that PSC inspections can be performed by distance using online interviews and technology assets like drones? Is it not a bad idea?
I can take a stab at that one. I don't know if it's a good or bad idea. What I can say is during the COVID pandemic, there was a drastic increase in remote port state control inspections, maybe not the entirety of them. However, through that, after the pandemic kind of was in the rearview mirror, we did really try to steer away from conducting those exams remotely. I would say that the appetite to accept even remote surveys is much less than it was before, just based on the trends that we noticed over that period of time where we were accepting remote surveys. I do think there are pieces though that are reviewed at distance. I know the question mentioned an interview. I think there's definitely some administrative items that can be pre-screened to try to, maybe save time. Obviously the ship is busy when it comes into port. People are all turning and burning, trying to get stores, cargo. So we recognize that the last thing ship's crew wants is the port state control taking folks away from their primary duties. So I do hope that there are some of those administrative type items that are being looked at prematurely prior to the ship's arrival. But as far as ship systems, life-saving, firefighting, those I would say we likely would not want to do remotely.
Great. We have another one for you. This one says, not directly related to PSC, when will the VITA replace the USCG VGP for scrubber discharges in the U.S. waters?
I knew this was going to come up. So what I can say is we are in the process of drafting the regulations. So they are still in the draft phase. So I can't quite give the specifics. What I could tell you is the final rule that was published does have some dates in there that basically tells the federal government when they have to implement. I think that the target date was fall of 2026. I don't know if that is going to happen or not. All I can say is it's still in the draft regulatory process, and the Coast Guard's working to finalize those.
Great, thanks for that. The following question is asking, do we know the planned Paris and Tokyo MOU CIC topic for 2027?
I can take this one. And actually, I would focus on 2026 first, because we have just passed the one from September to November last year, but we are quite far from the one of this year. And we know that this year the Paris and Tokyo MOU will focus on cargo securing. So that will be the main topic of the campaign from September to November. So I think let's focus on this one first.
Great, thank you. Next is asking, after a vessel has been detained, how much time do owners have to appeal a detention?
I can also take this one, at least for some MOUs, and I assume US Coast Guard can also answer on their side. But basically, again, each MOU has its own process, and inside each MOU, each port state has its own process as well. And so for the main MOUs, you will find on the website, it is public document. And inside this document, you will find for each state, you have a deadline. So it can be from a couple of weeks up to 2 months. So each flag state has its own process. Each port state has its own process, but it is public for the main MOU. And I let US Coast Guard answer for their state.
Okay, our appeal time clock is 30 days. So that starts upon the time of notification of detention.
Great. Thank you both for that. Moving on to line 87, says, as far as I know, the port states have full authority to board and inspect foreign vessels on their waters. I am not aware of a possibility for a master to refuse PSC inspection. Can this be clarified by the PSCO or USCG as their point of view?
I could provide some context. Yes, the master cannot refuse. If the vessel's within our territorial sea, the Coast Guard has full authority to board the ship anytime, day or night, for the detection, suppression, and of all applicable laws and regulations. So that I would not recommend refusing a port state control exam in U.S. waters.
Great, thank you. The next one is line 88. Thanking Darren for the perfect and to-the-point presentation. According to your experience, how a port state and a flag state survey should cooperate, and what is the major mistake that masters are making during a control or before when a deficiency exists?
So it's quite a good question, actually. And the simple answer to it is honesty and transparency. Where the master's on board the vessel, the master should give full cooperation and full assistance with any external inspector. Obviously, port state controls are the people who are going to stop the vessel from sailing from the port. But if they're open and they're honest, and when a deficiency is identified, if the master or the crew were unaware of it, if they start working on it straight away, we quite often have port state control where the crew have been issued deficiencies and they all stand around just looking and trying to work out who's going to volunteer to rectify the deficiency first. If a deficiency is identified, my advice is be incredibly proactive. Show the inspector, show the port state control officer that you are taking immediate actions to rectify the deficiency, and just fully cooperate with any external inspectors. And any external inspector, Lieutenant Chris will probably back me up, if the crew are there, the crew are participating, the crew are involved, and the crew are genuinely trying to make the inspection run smoothly, the inspector will be maybe not more lenient, but will be more reasonable and more rational and less inclined to going hardball with both feet. It is my advice to anybody dealing with an external inspector.
Thank you. We have another question for BV. How can we access the MOU campaigns and BV guidelines on respective campaigns?
I can take this one. Most of the campaign, for most of the cases, we have published what we call a class and statutory news on Move. So this is our main website, and this is where you will find all the news about class and statutory info. So usually we publish through that, and also when the surveyor go on board, there is possibility that he also explained that the campaign is going on, but this is mainly for the voluntary campaign. For the campaign that are already followed by Paris and Tokyo MOU, for example, we would publish on class and statutory on Move.
Thank you. Could you provide comments regarding how to manage a failure of EGR system in main engine when the vessel is arriving in a port within an ECA area?
Yes, be open and honest. All of the regulations all allow for emergency situations and the ability to operate, allow the vessel to continue to operate safely whilst non fully complying. So if you have an issue with your emissions, declare it to the port. Tell the port what the issue is, get the vessel alongside, get the vessel operating safely, inform class, inform flag. They can come to the vessel, they can look at the issue with you, and allow for quite often the vessel to enter port, rectify the issues, rectify the deficiencies, and sail without a port state control intervention. That open and honesty and that declaration and getting class involved as soon as possible is quite often a way of mitigating the effects of an operational failure. And I can speak quite assuredly in the UK, if port state control are aware of the fact that the classification society have already been informed and are already dealing with the situation, they quite often back off and let class deal with the situation without the need for a port state control intervention.
Thanks, Darren. Moving on to line 90, understand code 30 is kind of a punishment to the ship before the departure is used. So if the port state control is the last safety net regarding safety, shouldn't PSC officers wait for flag or class inspections to be completed before the PSC issues their finding or decide on a possible detention?
Not necessarily. I think, again, as I mentioned before, case by case. At the point you're getting a port state control exam, which again we don't publish our specific targeting criteria, but essentially around give or take every 18 months a ship should have an exam, for just as a general rule. If we get to a point where the ship has detainable deficiencies, and it's case by case basis, if there's a systemic failure and it appears that things led up to that, we may come on board and determine that the class had a role or the flag had a role in that. So that, again, I would just say that our process is different and our role is different. There's times where a particular flag state may have allowed a ship to get to this level. If it went through all their exam criteria and all the surveys signed off were perfect, but there's objective evidence that shows that safety equipment or firefighting equipment were not in compliance, we reserve the right to issue the code 30. And again, I think what I mentioned earlier, what that does is that expands the scope for us, and I don't think it's intended to necessarily be a punishment, although you could argue it is. At the end of the day, what that does is that increases your rate of inspection with the United States Coast Guard when you're in our waters, and then that may change the scope. So you'll likely get points, and you will likely get examined more frequently.
Regarding engine room funnel fire dampers for proper sealing or closing, crew applies. We just lost. Sorry about that. Crew applies sealing rubber packing. Are these actions acceptable?
Good question. It depends on the location of the damper, because quite often in some funnel dampers, and certainly in exhaust trunks, they're designed to be a steel to steel seal. So if the crew are applying rubber packing, it should be fire resistant. It should also, quite often when they fit the rubber seal, it can actually cause the damper itself to distort. So should the rubber packing fall out or become detached, you can actually find that the flap is no longer able to maintain a seal. So if it was designed for a steel to steel seal, it should be maintained with a steel to steel seal. If it had rubber packing initially, then by all means replace the rubber packing with a fire retardant rubber packing. One of the important things, as you remember from the photographs earlier on, is it's all well and good the outside edges being able to seal, as long as the inside of it is fully intact and can maintain an airtight seal.
Great, thank you. What could be an average U.S. Coast Guard inspection frequency in addition to the standard annual and renewal COC examinations?
That's a really tough question, because if you have your COCs, you could have an interval for tank ships, you could have your COC intervals for passenger ships, which have periodics, which are a little different. And then I would say that's a pretty tough question to answer because it can vary so greatly. And again, we don't publish our scoring criteria. However, detentions obviously increase frequency of port state control exams. Code 17s. So if you're issued a deficiency with a prior to departure, that could increase your exam frequency. If you are in the United States and you're issued a captain of the port order and a control action, that could also increase your exam frequency. So that's a bit tough to answer specifically. I would just say that it could be very frequent should you have issues. I'll just close with the best way, and Darren touched on it, the best way to avoid port state control, not examination, but intervention. I can't tell you how many times we and at the headquarters level too, we see it. We understand that, ships are working pieces of equipment under heavy stress, heavy load, that are out on the high seas for long periods of time. I think everybody who sailed on board ships knows that things break, and they break all the time, and that's just part of the maritime industry. The biggest piece that we hone in on, especially at my level when we're reviewing every single detention that is issued in the United States, is what was the ship and the ship's management doing to correct the issue? And Darren touched on it at the end of his presentation, the SMS. If things break and things are wrong, but the ship was proactively communicating to get replacement parts, making sure the logs were up to date, notified the company, and followed that safety management system, really, that's it. That's your lifeline. Follow your SMS, and port state control pretty much 9 times out of 10 leaves you alone. That when you get detained, it's because we find objective evidence and clear grounds that policies and procedures were not followed and notifications were not made. And that's kind of where the honesty and transparency, it's just better to be open about things and fire off the quick email and have that to present. You mentioned the scrubber. If the scrubber goes down, I'm sure that happens all the time. But following the shipboard procedures and notifying upon discovery and following the SMS, that's where the United States at least is going to say, okay, let's make sure we allow the ship to proceed into our ECA and carry out repairs, and they're not penalized for that. So I'll end with that.
Great, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are coming to a close. So on behalf of Bureau Veritas, I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. A very special thank you to Lieutenant Chris McFarland for joining us and sharing your expertise. We've appreciated you all taking the time to be with us today, and we hope you found this session informative. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.